Layla's trembling hands counted the last few coins in her purse, her heart sinking with each clink against the pharmacy counter. The pharmacist looked at her with a mixture of pity and impatience as she struggled to gather enough money for Iman's medicine. Her son's fever had been raging for days, and she was desperate to bring it down. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but you're still short by $10, the pharmacist said, pushing the bottle of pills just out of her reach. Layla bit her lip, fighting back tears. "Please, isn't there anything you can do? My son, he's so sick." The pharmacist shook his head, unmoved. "I'm sorry, but I can't give you the medicine without full payment. It's store policy." Defeated, Layla gathered her meager coins and left the pharmacy, the weight of failure heavy on her shoulders. The walk home felt longer than usual, each step a reminder of her inability to provide for her child. Back in their small apartment, Layla found Iman curled up on the worn-out couch, his small frame shivering despite the blanket wrapped tightly around him. She knelt beside him, pressing her cool hand against his burning forehead. "Mama." Iman's voice was weak, his eyes glassy with fever. "I'm here, Habibi," Layla whispered, forcing a smile. "You'll feel better soon, I promise." As she held her son close, rocking him gently, her phone buzzed in her pocket. The caller ID showed her workplace, and a flicker of hope ignited in her chest. Maybe they were calling about the overtime she'd requested. "Hello," she answered, her voice hushed to not disturb Iman. "Layla, this is HR. I'm calling about your position at the company." The voice on the other end sounded detached, professional. Her heart raced. "Yes? Is this about the extra hours I asked for?" There was a pause, then, "I'm sorry to inform you that due to recent budget cuts, we're having to let go of several employees. Unfortunately, your position has been terminated, effective immediately." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Layla gripped the phone tighter, her voice barely a whisper. "But I need this job. My son, he's sick, I can't." "We understand this is difficult. Your final paycheck will be processed next week. Thank you for your service to the company." The line went dead, leaving Layla in stunned silence. She looked around the sparse apartment, her mind racing. What could she sell? The TV was already gone, traded for last month's rent. Her wedding ring? Pawned when Iman needed new shoes for school. Desperate, she began rummaging through drawers and closets, searching for anything of value. Old clothes, broken electronics, nothing worth more than a few dollars at best. In her frantic search, she knocked over a stack of bills, the red "Final Notice" stamps glaring up at her from the floor. As she slumped against the wall, the faint sound of the TV in the neighbor's apartment caught her attention. A commercial was playing, the overly cheerful voice seeming to mock her situation. "Are you a woman in need? Desperate for a financial solution? Our exclusive agency offers unique opportunities for those willing to take a chance." Layla found herself drawn to the screen visible through the thin walls. The ad showed glamorous women in luxurious settings, their worries seemingly erased by whatever this agency offered. Despite her better judgment, she felt a spark of curiosity. With shaking hands, she pulled out her phone and searched for the agency online. The website was sleek, promising discretion and life-changing opportunities. Before she could talk herself out of it, Layla dialed the number listed. "Elite Connections, how may we assist you?" A polished voice answered. Layla's voice trembled as she spoke. I saw your ad. I'm interested in learning more about your opportunities." "Excellent. We'd be happy to schedule an interview. When would you be available to come in?" The next day found Layla sitting in a plush office, feeling out of place in her best but worn clothes. The interviewer, a sharply dressed woman with a predatory smile, looked her up and down. "So Layla, tell me why you're here today." Layla swallowed hard, thinking of Iman at home with a neighbor. "I need money. Desperately. I'll do almost anything." The woman's smile widened. "Almost anything? That's good to hear. We have an event coming up that might be perfect for you. A companion auction for some of our most elite clients." Layla's eyes widened as the woman explained the details. It was more than she had bargained for, but as she thought of Iman's feverish face and the mounting bills, she knew she had no choice. That evening, Layla stood in front of her cracked mirror, applying makeup to hide the dark circles under her eyes. She slipped on a borrowed dress, the fabric foreign against her skin. With one last look at the photo of Iman on her nightstand, she steeled herself for what was to come. The venue was opulent, a stark contrast to the life she knew. Layla felt eyes on her as she entered, some curious, others hungry. She tried to blend in with the other women, all seeming far more at ease than she felt. As the auction began, Layla's heart pounded in her chest. She watched as women were presented and bid upon, each command of sold, sending a shiver down her spine. When it was her turn, she stepped onto the stage with trembling legs. The spotlight blinded her, but through the glare, she noticed a man in a dark suit watching her intently. His gaze was cold, calculating, and yet there was something else there that she couldn't quite place. Suddenly, a voice rang out with a bid that made the room gasp. Layla's eyes widened as she realized it came from the man in the dark suit. As the gavel fell and sold echoed through the room, he approached the stage. His eyes met hers, piercing and unreadable. In a firm voice that sent a chill through her, he said, "I have a proposition for you, but with one special condition." The opulent ballroom buzzed with tension as Layla found herself face to face with the man in the dark suit. His piercing gaze sent shivers down her spine, a mixture of fear and intrigue coursing through her veins. "I have a proposal for you," he said, his voice low and commanding, "but with a special condition." Layla's heart raced as the man, who introduced himself as Kareem, led her to a secluded corner of the room. The sounds of the auction faded into the background as she focused on his words, each one carrying the weight of her future. Kareem's eyes never left hers as he spoke, detailing an offer that seemed too good to be true. A substantial sum of money, enough to secure Iman's future and solve all their financial woes. But the catch, when it came, hit Layla like a punch to the gut. "I need an heir," Kareem stated matter-of-factly, his tone devoid of emotion. "You will provide me with a child." Layla's mind reeled, images of Iman flashing before her eyes. She thought of his fever, the empty medicine bottles, the mounting bills. Could she really do this? Sell herself, her body, for the sake of her son? As if sensing her hesitation, Kareem produced a preliminary contract. The numbers on the page made Layla's head spin. It was more money than she had ever seen in her life. With trembling hands, she signed the document, feeling as though she were signing away her soul. No sooner had the pen left the paper than a commotion erupted nearby. A drunken man, his eyes glazed and movements unsteady, approached Layla aggressively. His intentions were clear, and Layla felt fear grip her heart. But before the man could reach her, Kareem stepped between them. His voice, cold as ice, cut through the air. "I suggest you walk away now," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The drunk man, recognizing the authority in Kareem's voice, stumbled back and disappeared into the crowd. Layla watched the exchange with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Kareem's intervention had been swift and effective, but the coldness in his eyes as he dealt with the threat sent a chill through her. As they left the event together, curious eyes followed their every move. Layla felt exposed, vulnerable, as if everyone could see the bargain she had just struck. The ride to Kareem's mansion was filled with tense silence. Layla stared out the window, the city lights blurring as they sped through the streets. She clutched her phone, desperately wanted to call the babysitter and check on Iman, but something held her back. Perhaps it was the fear that hearing her son's voice would break her resolve. When they finally arrived at Kareem's home, Layla's breath caught in her throat. The mansion loomed before her, a monument to wealth and power. It was a world away from the tiny apartment she shared with Iman. Kareem gave her a brief tour, his words clipped and businesslike. Each room they passed was more lavish than the last, but Layla barely registered the opulence. Her mind was still reeling from the events of the evening. Finally, they reached a bedroom. Her bedroom, Kareem informed her. He left her at the door with a curt nod, disappearing down the hallway without a backward glance. Alone in the room, Layla's composure finally cracked. She sank onto the plush bed, her body shaking with silent sobs. What had she done? How could she explain this to Iman? As the reality of her situation settled in, Layla moved to the window, seeking some connection to the outside world. But as she gazed out, she saw the massive gates of the mansion closing with a final, ominous clang. The sound echoed through her, and suddenly, Layla felt more trapped than ever before. She was in a gilded cage, one of her own making, and the enormity of her decision crashed down upon her. Alone in her luxurious prison, Layla opened the window and watched the mansion gates close, a sense of confinement overwhelming her. Layla stirred awake, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Sunlight streamed through heavy velvet curtains, illuminating the opulent bedroom she now called her own. As reality settled in, her thoughts immediately turned to Iman. She hurried to get dressed, eager to bring her son to their new home. The drive to pick up Iman was filled with a mix of excitement and apprehension. How would he react to such a drastic change? As they approached the mansion, Iman's eyes widened in wonder. "Mama, is this where we're going to live?" he asked, his voice filled with awe. Layla nodded, squeezing his hand reassuringly. As they entered the grand foyer, they were greeted by Amira, the housekeeper. Her smile was warm but cautious as she welcomed them. "Mrs. Layla, young Master Iman, welcome to your new home," she said, her eyes darting between them and the imposing staircase behind her. Iman, oblivious to the underlying tension, began exploring the house with unbridled enthusiasm. His excited gasps echoed through the halls as he discovered each new room, each more luxurious than the last. Layla watched him, her heart swelling with a mixture of joy and concern. The sound of footsteps announced Kareem's arrival. He stood at the top of the stairs, his expression unreadable. "I hope you've settled in," he said, his tone formal. "My family will be joining us for lunch. I expect you both to be present." Layla's stomach knotted with anxiety. She hadn't anticipated facing Kareem's family so soon. As they gathered in the dining room, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Kareem's parents, siblings, and their spouses eyed Layla and Iman with thinly veiled disapproval. The introductions were stiff, the conversation stilted. Throughout the meal, Layla could feel the weight of judgment upon her. She tried to engage in polite conversation, but her attempts were met with curt responses and meaningful glances between family members. Iman, sensing the tension, remained uncharacteristically quiet, picking at his food. After the uncomfortable lunch, Layla sought out Kareem, hoping to discuss the household rules and expectations. She found him in his study, immersed in work. "Kareem," she began hesitantly, "I was hoping we could talk about." He cut her off with a raised hand. "Everything you need to know, Amira will inform you. I have pressing matters to attend to." His dismissal stung, leaving Layla feeling more alone than ever. Later that afternoon, as Layla wandered the halls, she came across Amira dusting a collection of framed photographs. One in particular caught her eye, a younger Kareem, his smile radiant and carefree. It was a stark contrast to the stern, distant man she now knew. Noticing Layla's interest, Amira's expression softened. "That was taken before," she said quietly, "before he lost his wife." The revelation hung in the air, offering a glimpse into the pain that had shaped Kareem into the man he was now. As days passed, Layla struggled to find her place in the household. She attempted to cook in the vast, unfamiliar kitchen, feeling out of place among the high-end appliances and exotic ingredients. Her efforts to make Iman feel at home were challenged by the cold reception from Kareem's family. One afternoon, Layla watched from a window as Iman attempted to join a group of children, Kareem's nieces and nephews, playing in the garden. Her heart sank as she saw them deliberately exclude him, turning their backs and running off to play elsewhere. Iman returned to her, his eyes brimming with tears. "Why don't they like me, Mama?" he asked, his voice quivering. Layla knelt down, pulling him into a tight embrace. "They just need time to get to know you, sweetheart," she soothed, fighting back her own tears. "We'll make new friends soon, I promise." The incident hardened Layla's resolve to carve out a place for herself and Iman in this new world. She began to assert herself more, determined to prove her worth beyond the terms of her agreement with Kareem. Her efforts, however, were met with resistance. During a family gathering, Layla overheard a snide comment about her background. I suppose we can't expect much class from someone of her origins, a cousin remarked, loudly enough for Layla to hear. Before Layla could respond, Kareem's voice cut through the tension. I suggest you keep such opinions to yourself, he said, his tone icy. The room fell silent, all eyes on Kareem. While his defense of Layla was unexpected, his demeanor remained cold and detached. That night, as Layla tucked Ayman into bed, the weight of their situation pressed heavily upon her. Once alone in her room, she allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. Silent tears streamed down her face as she questioned the decision that had brought them here. The luxury surrounding her felt hollow in the face of the emotional toll it exacted. As she wiped away her tears, Layla caught sight of her reflection in the ornate mirror. The woman staring back at her seemed a stranger, lost, uncertain, but with a glimmer of determination in her eyes. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the challenges that lay ahead. This was her reality now, and for Ayman's sake, she would find a way to make it work. A scream echoing through the mansion jolted Layla from her sleep, sending her running into the hallway in panic. The tension in the mansion escalated with each passing day. Layla found herself walking on eggshells, constantly aware of the judgmental glances from Kareem's family members. She longed for a moment of peace, a respite from the suffocating atmosphere that seemed to permeate every corner of the grand house. One evening, as Layla tucked Ayman into bed, she heard a commotion from down the hall. Curiosity got the better of her, and she quietly made her way towards the source of the disturbance. As she approached Kareem's study, she overheard a heated conversation between him and his doctor. Mr. Kareem, I understand your frustration, but the test results are conclusive. Your condition hasn't improved. The doctor's voice was firm but sympathetic. Kareem's response was barely audible, but the defeat in his tone was unmistakable. Layla's heart raced as she pieced together the implications of what she had just heard. She retreated to her room, her mind swirling with questions and concerns. The next morning, as Layla was helping Ayman with his breakfast, Amira entered the kitchen with a troubled expression. The kind-hearted housekeeper had become Layla's only ally in the mansion, and she could sense something was amiss. Amira, is everything all right? Layla asked, her voice laced with concern. Amira hesitated before responding. It's not my place to say, but I think you should know. Mr. Kareem, he's been struggling with a medical condition for years. It's the reason he's so desperate for an heir. Layla's suspicions were confirmed, and her heart ached for Kareem. Despite his cold exterior, she realized there was a vulnerability to him that he kept carefully hidden from the world. As the days passed, Layla found herself trying to bridge the emotional gap between her and Kareem. She would leave small gestures of kindness, a cup of his favorite tea left on his desk, a thoughtful note tucked into his briefcase. Yet Kareem remained distant, his walls seemingly impenetrable. The breaking point came during a formal dinner arranged to introduce Layla and Ayman to Kareem's extended family. The air was thick with tension as they gathered in the opulent dining room. Ayman, dressed in an uncomfortable suit that Layla had painstakingly altered to fit him, fidgeted nervously in his chair. As the first course was served, the conversation turned to Layla's background. Thinly veiled insults were disguised as polite inquiries, each question designed to emphasize her perceived unworthiness. And what exactly did you do before this arrangement? Kareem's aunt asked, her voice dripping with disdain. Layla straightened her shoulders, determined to maintain her dignity. I worked in customer service, ma'am. It may not seem glamorous, but it taught me valuable skills in patience and empathy. A derisive snort came from further down the table. Kareem's cousin, a man with a perpetual sneer, fixed his gaze on Ayman. And what about you, boy? Do you know who your real father is? The room fell silent. Ayman, confused and hurt by the cruel question, accidentally knocked over his glass of juice. The expensive tablecloth was instantly stained a deep red. Layla's maternal instincts kicked in. She stood up, her eyes blazing with protective fury. How dare you speak to my son that way? Ayman is a kind, intelligent boy who deserves respect, regardless of his background. If you can't see that, then perhaps you're the ones who don't belong at this table. The room erupted into chaos. Kareem's family members began talking over each other, some expressing outrage at Layla's outburst, others awkwardly trying to defuse the situation. Through it all, Layla noticed Kareem watching her, his expression a mixture of surprise and something else she couldn't quite decipher. Was it admiration? Without waiting for a response, Layla took Ayman's hand and led him out of the dining room. As they retreated to the safety of their quarters, she could hear raised voices echoing through the hallways. Kareem was arguing with his family, his usually controlled tone now sharp with anger. In the quiet of Ayman's room, Layla held her son close, whispering words of comfort and reassurance. "You are perfect just the way you are, my love. Don't ever let anyone make you feel otherwise." As Ayman's breathing steadied and he drifted off to sleep, Layla's resolve hardened. She couldn't subject her son to this toxic environment any longer. With determination in her eyes, she began to pack their belongings, her mind made up to leave this gilded cage behind. Just as she zipped up the last suitcase, the door to her room swung open. Kareem stood in the doorway, his expression unlike anything Layla had seen before. It was a look of vulnerability, of walls finally crumbling down. Layla, determined, began to make the bags, decided to leave the mansion, when Kareem entered the room with an expression she had never seen before. Layla's hand trembled as she reached for the doorknob, her hastily packed suitcase weighing heavily by her side. The events of the disastrous family dinner replayed in her mind, fueling her determination to leave this gilded cage. Just as her fingers grazed the cool metal, the door swung open, revealing Kareem's imposing figure. His eyes, usually cold and distant, now held an expression she had never seen before. "Where do you think you're going?" Kareem's voice was low, a mix of concern and frustration evident in his tone. Layla straightened her back, meeting his gaze defiantly. "I can't stay here anymore, Kareem. This isn't the life I want for Ayman or myself." For a moment, silence hung between them, thick with unspoken words and suppressed emotions. Then, to Layla's surprise, Kareem's shoulders sagged, and he let out a deep sigh. "Please give me a chance to explain," he said, his usual commanding tone replaced by something softer, almost vulnerable. "There's more to this situation than you know." Hesitantly, Layla lowered her suitcase. Curiosity and a flicker of hope overrode her initial impulse to flee. She followed Kareem to his study, a room she had rarely entered since her arrival at the mansion. As they settled into the plush leather chairs, Kareem began to speak, revealing parts of his past that he had kept closely guarded. He spoke of his late wife, the pain of losing her, and the pressure from his family to produce an heir. His voice cracked as he described the medical condition that made it nearly impossible for him to father a child naturally. "I never meant to treat you and Ayman as mere solutions to my problems," Kareem admitted, his eyes focused on the intricate patterns of the Persian rug beneath their feet. "I've been so focused on fulfilling my family's expectations that I lost sight of what truly matters." Layla listened, her anger slowly melting into understanding. For the first time, she saw Kareem not as the cold, calculating businessman, but as a man burdened by expectations and past traumas. "I'm sorry for how my family has treated you and Ayman," Kareem continued, finally meeting Layla's gaze. "It's not fair, and it ends now. If you're willing to stay, I promise things will be different." As Layla pondered his words, she became acutely aware of a wave of nausea washing over her. She had been so caught up in the drama of the household that she had ignored the subtle changes in her body over the past few weeks. Excusing herself hastily, she rushed to the nearest bathroom. Later that evening, after Ayman had been tucked into bed, Layla found herself pacing in her room, a small plastic stick clutched in her trembling hands. The two pink lines stared back at her, confirming what she had begun to suspect. She was pregnant. The revelation hit her like a tidal wave. Joy, fear, and utter confusion battled for dominance in her mind. How was this possible? Kareem had told her about his condition. Would he believe her? Would anyone in this household trust that she had been faithful? As dawn broke, casting a soft golden light through the curtains, Layla made her decision. She would tell Kareem. Whatever the consequences, he deserved to know. She found him in the garden, his usual morning ritual of checking on his prized roses providing a moment of solitude. Layla approached cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. "Kareem," she called softly, causing him to turn. "There's something I need to tell you." His eyebrows furrowed at her serious tone. "What is it, Layla?" Taking a deep breath, she spoke the words that would change everything. "I'm pregnant." Kareem's reaction was a mix of disbelief and suspicion. His eyes widened, then narrowed as he processed her words. "How is that possible? You know about my condition." Layla felt a stab of pain at his implied accusation. "I've been faithful, Kareem. I swear it. I'm as surprised as you are." A tense silence fell between them. Kareem's internal struggle was evident on his face. Hope warring with doubt, joy with fear. "We'll need to confirm this with a doctor," he finally said, his voice carefully neutral. "And keep this between us for now. My family, they wouldn't understand." Layla nodded, relief and apprehension mingling in her chest. As they walked back towards the mansion, Kareem's hand brushed against hers, a small gesture that spoke volumes. For the first time since she had arrived, Layla felt a glimmer of real connection between them. As they reached the patio, Kareem turned to her, his expression softening. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together," he said quietly. Layla managed a small smile, hope blossoming in her heart. Perhaps there was a chance for happiness in this unexpected situation after all. As Layla and Kareem sealed their agreement of silence with a hesitant embrace, a figure watched them from the shadows of the mansion. Layla woke to the sound of raised voices echoing through the mansion. Her heart raced as she recognized the angry tones of Kareem's family members. Throwing on a robe, she rushed downstairs, her bare feet silent on the cold marble floors. As she entered the living room, all eyes turned to her. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and Layla felt a chill run down her spine. Kareem's mother, her face twisted in disgust, pointed an accusing finger at Layla. "How dare you bring such shame to our family?" she spat. "We welcomed you into our home, and this is how you repay us? By betraying our son?" Layla's mind reeled, struggling to comprehend the situation. "I don't understand. What's going on?" Kareem's father stepped forward, his voice low and menacing. "Don't play innocent. We know about your condition. How could you possibly be pregnant when Kareem can't father children?" The realization hit Layla like a bucket of ice water. Somehow, the news of her pregnancy had leaked. She looked desperately at Kareem, silently pleading for his support, but he stood motionless, his face an unreadable mask. "Please, you have to believe me," Layla begged. "I've been faithful to Kareem. This child is his. I swear it." But her words fell on deaf ears. The family's accusations grew louder, their words cutting deep into Layla's heart. She felt herself shrinking under their hostile glares, her confidence crumbling. A small voice cut through the chaos. "Mama." Iman stood at the bottom of the stairs, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. Layla's heart broke at the sight of her son witnessing this ugly scene. Amira, ever the voice of reason, tried to calm the situation. "Please, let's all take a moment to breathe. We shouldn't jump to conclusions without proof." But Kareem's family was relentless. They demanded explanations, hurled insults, and questioned Layla's character. Through it all, Kareem remained silent, his lack of defense cutting deeper than any accusation. Finally, Kareem spoke, his voice devoid of emotion. "We need medical proof. Layla will undergo tests to confirm the paternity of the child." Layla nodded, grateful for the chance to prove her innocence, yet hurt by the doubt in Kareem's eyes. The drive to the hospital was tense and silent. Layla felt like a criminal being led to trial, rather than an expectant mother. At the hospital, Layla endured a battery of tests, each one adding to her feelings of humiliation. The sterile walls and probing questions from medical staff only heightened her sense of isolation. As they returned to the mansion, exhausted and emotionally drained, a sleek car pulled up to the entrance. A stunningly beautiful woman stepped out, her eyes fixed on Kareem with a mixture of longing and anger. "Yasmin." Kareem's voice was a mixture of surprise and apprehension. Layla's stomach dropped. She had heard whispers about Kareem's ex-fiancée, but never expected to come face to face with her. Yasmin's eyes narrowed as they fell on Layla. "So, this is the gold digger who's wormed her way into your life, Kareem?" Her voice dripped with disdain. "Yasmin, please. This isn't the time," Kareem said, his tone weary. But Yasmin was undeterred. She turned to Layla, her words laced with venom. "Did you think you could trap him with a baby? How pathetic. A man of Kareem's status deserves better than some desperate, common woman." Layla felt her cheeks burn with anger and shame. She wanted to defend herself, to scream that her love for Kareem was real, that she never meant for any of this to happen. But the words caught in her throat. The confrontation moved inside, with Yasmin continuing her tirade in front of Kareem's family. They seemed all too eager to believe the worst about Layla, nodding along with Yasmin's accusations. Kareem finally intervened, but his words were cold and distant. "That's enough, Yasmin. This is a private matter." His lack of a strong defense left Layla feeling more alone than ever. Unable to bear the hostile glares and whispered insults any longer, she fled to her room, locking the door behind her. Layla collapsed onto the bed, her body shaking with silent sobs. How had everything gone so wrong? The dream of a new life, of love and family, was crumbling around her. She felt trapped, judged, and utterly alone. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the room, Layla's phone rang. She stared at it, her heart pounding. It was the hospital. With trembling hands, she answered, the doctor's grave voice filling her ear. Layla's hand trembled as she answered the phone, her heart pounding in her chest. The doctor's voice on the other end was clear and professional, delivering the news that would change everything. As she listened, a mix of relief and vindication washed over her. The tests confirmed what she had known all along. Kareem was indeed the father of her unborn child. With newfound strength, Layla marched downstairs to confront the family. She found them gathered in the living room, their faces a mixture of curiosity and lingering suspicion. Taking a deep breath, she announced, "The results are in. Kareem is the father of this baby. I have never been unfaithful." The room fell silent for a moment before erupting into a cacophony of voices. Some family members looked shocked, others skeptical. Kareem, who had been standing by the window, turned to face Layla. His eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, she saw a flicker of regret. "Layla," he began, stepping towards her. "I'm sorry for doubting you." But the words, though appreciated, couldn't erase the pain of the past few days. Layla nodded, acknowledging his apology, but the hurt lingered in her eyes. The family, faced with irrefutable evidence, reluctantly began to accept the situation. Yet, Layla could feel the tension persisting, like a thick fog that refused to dissipate. As days passed, Layla noticed the subtle changes in the household. Whispers followed her through the corridors, and sideways glances were cast her way during meals. The vindication of her innocence had not brought the peace she had hoped for. Even Kareem, despite his apology, maintained an emotional distance that left her feeling cold and alone. One evening, as Layla tucked Ayman into bed, the boy looked up at her with his innocent eyes and asked, "Mama, are we happy here?" The question struck Layla like a physical blow. She forced a smile and kissed his forehead, but inside her mind was racing. That night, after Ayman had fallen asleep, she began to secretly research housing options on her phone. The idea of leaving, once unthinkable, now seemed like the only way to protect herself and her children. Over the next few days, Layla carefully prepared for their departure. She squirreled away cash and important documents in her purse, hiding them from prying eyes. During a particularly tense dinner, where the topic of her pregnancy arose, Layla watched as Kareem interacted coldly with Ayman. The sight cemented her decision. They couldn't stay in this environment. Seeking guidance, Layla confided in Amira. The kind-hearted housekeeper listened patiently as Layla poured out her fears and doubts. "I understand your concerns, Layla," Amira said softly. "But are you sure this is the best solution?" Layla nodded, her mind made up. That night, she penned a letter explaining her reasons for leaving, her hand shaking as she wrote. The words flowed, a mixture of gratitude for the opportunity Kareem had given her and sorrow for the love that never had a chance to bloom. As the household slept, Layla quietly packed their belongings. She moved like a shadow through the room, careful not to wake Iman. With each item she placed in the suitcase, she felt a mixture of relief and sadness. This grand house, which had never truly felt like home, had still been a shelter for her and Iman. Standing by the window, Layla took one last look at the moonlit gardens of the mansion. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the desperate decision that had seemed like salvation but had turned into another kind of prison. Yet, she couldn't bring herself to regret it entirely. Without this experience, she wouldn't be carrying the child now growing within her. Layla gently woke Iman, explaining in whispers that they were going on an adventure. The sleepy boy nodded, too tired to question his mother's decision. As she zipped up the last bag, Layla felt a strange mix of emotions. Fear of the unknown future, relief at escaping the suffocating atmosphere of the mansion, and a tiny, persistent ache of what might have been with Kareem. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. With Iman's hand in hers and their bags ready, Layla prepared to step into the uncertain future. She reached for the doorknob, her heart racing with anticipation and fear. Just then, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed in the hallway. Layla froze, her hand still on the doorknob, as she heard someone coming closer to her room. Layla's heart pounded in her chest as she heard footsteps approaching her room. She froze, her hand still on the suitcase she had just finished packing. The doorknob turned slowly, and she held her breath, knowing that her plans for escape were about to be discovered. Kareem stepped into the room, his eyes widening as he took in the scene before him. Layla stood there, caught between fight and flight, her face a mixture of defiance and fear. The packed bags spoke volumes, and for a moment, neither of them said a word. "You're leaving," Kareem said softly, his voice more hurt than accusatory. Layla nodded, finding her voice. "I can't stay here anymore, Kareem. This isn't the life I want for myself or for Iman." Kareem's expression softened, and for the first time since she had known him, Layla saw a genuine vulnerability in his eyes. "Please," he said, "can we talk about this?" Reluctantly, Layla agreed, and they sat on the edge of the bed, the packed suitcases a stark reminder of what was at stake. As they began to talk, really talk for the first time since their arrangement began, the walls between them started to crumble. Kareem revealed his fears and insecurities about fatherhood, stemming from his own complicated relationship with his parents. "I've always wanted a family," he confessed, "but I'm terrified of failing as a father." Layla listened, her heart softening as she began to understand the man behind the cold exterior. She, in turn, opened up about her feelings of isolation and judgment within the household. "I felt like an outsider, Kareem, like I was just a means to an end for you and your family." As they shared their truths, a new understanding began to form between them. The conversation, however, was abruptly interrupted by a small, distressed voice. "Mama!" Iman called out weakly from his bed. Layla rushed to her son's side, Kareem close behind. Iman was burning up with fever, his small body shaking under the covers. Without hesitation, Kareem sprang into action, calling for a doctor and helping Layla tend to the boy. The next few hours were a blur of worry and frantic activity. The doctor arrived, examining Iman with a grave expression that did nothing to calm Layla's fears. "It's a severe case of pneumonia," he explained. "We need to start treatment immediately." As they waited for the medication to take effect, Layla and Kareem kept vigil by Iman's bedside. Layla watched in amazement as Kareem gently wiped Iman's forehead with a cool cloth, whispering words of comfort to the child he had once viewed with such detachment. Throughout the night, they worked together, taking turns to comfort Iman and administer his medication. In those quiet hours, as the rest of the household slept, Layla saw a side of Kareem she had never witnessed before. His concern for Iman was genuine, his actions those of a man who truly cared. As dawn broke, casting a soft light through the windows, Iman's fever finally began to break. Exhausted but relieved, Layla and Kareem shared a look of mutual understanding. They had weathered this storm together, and something had fundamentally changed between them. In the quiet of the early morning, with Ayman sleeping peacefully at last, Layla and Kareem had a hushed conversation about their fears and hopes for the future. Kareem spoke of his desire to be a better man, a better father to both Ayman and their unborn child. Layla, in turn, expressed her longing for a true partnership, a family built on love rather than obligation. As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting a warm glow over the room, Layla and Kareem sat side by side, watching Ayman sleep. The packed suitcases stood forgotten in the corner, a reminder of how close they had come to losing this chance at happiness. In that moment of shared exhaustion and relief, a silent understanding passed between them. The barriers that had kept them apart were crumbling, replaced by the foundations of something stronger, something real. Kareem reached out and took Layla's hand in his own. Their eyes met, and in that gaze was a promise of a new beginning. The journey ahead would not be easy, but for the first time, Layla felt hope blossoming in her heart. Kareem squeezed her hand gently, his eyes never leaving hers as he said, "We need to talk about our future, all of us." The morning sun cast a warm glow over the garden as Kareem and Layla sat side by side on a stone bench. The air was thick with anticipation, both of them knowing that this conversation would shape their future. Kareem took a deep breath, his hands fidgeting with a folded document. "Layla," he began, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it, "I've been doing a lot of thinking." He unfolded the paper, revealing the contract that had brought them together. Layla's heart raced as she recognized it, memories of that fateful night at the auction flooding back. Without warning, Kareem tore the contract in half, then quarters, then eighths. Layla watched in stunned silence as the pieces fluttered to the ground. "I don't want this between us anymore," he said, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that took her breath away. Before she could respond, Kareem slid off the bench and onto one knee. Layla's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Layla," Kareem said, his voice trembling slightly, "I know our beginning was unconventional, to say the least. But somewhere along the way, between the arguments and the misunderstandings, I fell in love with you. With your strength, your kindness, and the way you love Ayman. I want to start over, the right way this time. Will you marry me?" Tears welled up in Layla's eyes as she looked at the man before her. Gone was the cold, distant businessman she'd first met. In his place was a vulnerable, loving man who had opened his heart to her and Ayman. She took a moment to reflect on their journey, the challenges they'd overcome, and the unexpected love that had blossomed. "Yes," she whispered, her voice gaining strength. "Yes, Kareem, I will marry you." Joy spread across Kareem's face as he stood, pulling Layla into a tight embrace. They shared a tender kiss, both marveling at how far they'd come. Hand in hand, they walked back to the house, eager to share the news with Ayman. They found him in the playroom, building a tower of blocks. "Ayman," Layla called softly, "we have something important to tell you." The boy looked up, his eyes curious. Kareem knelt down beside him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Ayman, I've asked your mother to marry me, and she said yes. How would you feel about us becoming a real family?" Ayman's face lit up with excitement. He launched himself into Kareem's arms, nearly knocking him over. "Really? You're going to be my dad?" he asked, his voice muffled against Kareem's chest. "If you'll have me," Kareem replied, his voice thick with emotion. Layla watched the scene unfold, her heart swelling with love for both of them. This was the family she had always dreamed of, but never dared to hope for. That evening, Kareem gathered his family for dinner, ready to announce the news. The tension in the air was palpable as they all took their seats around the grand dining table. Kareem stood, clearing his throat to get everyone's attention. "I have an announcement to make," he began, his voice steady and confident. "Layla and I are getting married." The reaction was immediate and mixed. Some family members broke into smiles and offered congratulations, while others sat in stunned silence. Kareem's mother, who had been one of the most vocal opponents of their relationship, spoke up. "Kareem, are you sure about this? What about the family's reputation?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. Kareem's expression hardened slightly. Mother, Layla and Ayman are my family now. I love them, and I won't let anyone, not even you, stand in the way of our happiness. His firm stance silenced any further objections. Slowly, even the most reluctant family members began to offer their congratulations, albeit some more grudgingly than others. As the dinner progressed, Layla and Kareem began to discuss their plans for the future. They talked about the wedding, where they would live, and how they would raise their children together. For the first time, Layla felt like a